This is a Power 98.7 podcast. Now we're talking. Subscribe to Power 98.7 podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. There's more on power987.co.za. Monday 1:30 sees us talking about all things property, and we today want to explore the often overlooked aspect of real estate that touches all of our lives in profound ways. We're going to talk about the tombstone, the final resting place that our loved ones will be in, we one day will be in, and around all of the timing of tombstone placements. It's a permanent resting place and also a commemorative space for the lives of those who we have loved and lost. It also creates a lasting connection to our loved ones. But after this weekend and the funerals of both former Minister Tito Mboweni and Rhema Church founder Rhema Corley, this became a very big conversation, right? So the Limpopo Chronicle put up a post on X saying former Minister of Finance Tito Mboweni laid to rest at the Mboweni family cemetery in their village in Limpopo. And immediately questions came about saying, these days, but they up tombstone immediately after the funeral. Kante, you're not supposed to wait a few months for the ground to settle. And you know how X is. Ground to settle? What ground settling? What are you talking about? Why they do this is because there's a lack of immediate funds. So is that what we're calling ground must settle? Okay, then we'll start doing that with immediate effect. And back and forth it went, with others still talking about how in their specific cultures, people go and dig the pit, and then guys from the funeral parlor lay the tombstone the next day, and others talking about the specific structure around the tombstone being part of the issue why some people don't have to wait. So I thought, let's call in the big guns and get an expert in the field from Stanstones Managing Director, Irvine M. Stanford, who joins us to talk about this, the ideal moment when to erect a tombstone. Irvine, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to Power Lunch.
Thank you very much, Pabi. It's truly a privilege for me to be here. Thank you so much for bringing us here to talk about this interesting topic.
It is an interesting topic, and this is something that you work with every single day. Sure. Tell us a bit about your business and how this became something that you started operating in.
Okay, yeah, so sure. So of course, I've been myself. Basically, I've been in the funeral space for many years now. But so that was literally in burying and in literally burying the deceased and all of that kind of a business.
Right.
But then I pivoted to tombstones. But it is really quite a sensitive aspect of business where you really need a lot of love, sympathy, at times even empathy. Though you have to manage it.
Yes.
Because you are dealing with something that is quite sensitive. It's not like grocery shops and things like that.
Yes.
People have lost their loved ones and they are grieving and all of that. You need to have that kind of love and that kind of heart to be able to comfort them. So that's how we got into the space.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so, I want this conversation to be from all the aspects that emerge when you think about the time of laying a tombstone, right? So there's the cultural aspects, perhaps the religious aspects, the financial aspects. And then I also want to talk from just the basics of the ground, the foundation, cement, what the best polymers to use, what the trends are, and things of that nature. So let's go back to this example, right? Yeah. This Twitter person says these days the tombstone is laid immediately after the funeral. What are the key differences between placing the tombstone immediately after a funeral versus waiting a few months or a year?
Yeah, sure. So thanks a lot for that question. That's quite a good question. So in terms of deciding when to place a tombstone, it's quite relatively dependent on quite several factors.
Okay.
Which of course sometimes includes affordability, practicality, cultural, and things like that. So those are the things that you look at in deciding to erect a memorial on the day of the funeral, or you have to wait a few months. So that's why I'm saying that it's based on quite a few factors.
Yeah.
So it just sometimes depends because sometimes as well it's personal preferences, especially when there's no cultural issues and things like that. It can be just a matter of preferences.
Okay, so when somebody can erect on the day, what are some of the factors that allow them to do that?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so to touch on that, like I mentioned earlier now, that we have to consider those things, like what I'm saying in terms of my background, in terms of the funeral space. So in terms when it's cultural, we understand that there are cultures that you must put a memorial immediately on the day of the funeral.
Right.
So we are talking about a culture like Bavenda.
Yes.
So that kind of a culture is you need to put. So we actually have to build the tombstone before we even place the coffin inside the grave. So
before
we place the coffin in the grave.
Okay, explain that to me a bit more.
Okay, so to touch on that, what I mean by that is there is an opening. So usually with Bavenda people is they dig what we call like a big grave, sort of like a 2 grave plot.
Okay.
Where we then build on the other side, and then we do a foundation on the other side, and then we leave an opening on the other side, so that then we erect the tombstone, but there's an opening on the side or in front, depending on whichever way we have done it, and then the coffin or the casket will then be placed from the side then sealed.
Okay.
So that's a different culture.
So that is very specific to that culture for all of the norms and beliefs that they come with. That is why that would happen. Does it have anything to do with the ground quality? Because people were also talking about, certain practices happening in a village space rather than in a township space because of the quality of the sand and the ground that they're working with.
Well, look, Pabi, I think to answer to that is that so we definitely understand that the ground is a factor to consider.
Yes.
I think we are in the real estate segment where I actually love that because in the true aspect of it is truly a real estate.
Yes.
Yes. So whenever you want to build something, you need to of course have proper calculations in terms of what you want to put and things like that for your foundation sake.
Okay.
So you must be sure of the foundation before you can erect the tombstone. Okay. So the ground quality, of course, does play a big part in this. It absolutely does. But it now needs experts to then be able to maneuver around that and understand how much concrete you need to put that, and in the depth of the grave and the depth of the foundation and things like that. So that's where we come in, and we then are able to direct in terms of the pathway to take when it comes to erecting.
So then that then will also include giving advice around needing the ground to settle. Does the ground need to settle? What's settling?
Okay. So I think like what we have seen with the former minister this past weekend, a tombstone was then erected, and so when we look at that, the settling of the ground is because when you create a hole, when you dig a hole for the grave, right? So and then you bury someone, and then that's why you see the soil will be a heap on top. that particular soil came from that particular ground.
Yes.
But because it's because it has not been stamped, so that's why they're saying that let the ground naturally settle. So let that particular soil go down and sink so that the ground can settle. So that's why you have factors where you can then stamp the ground and things like that. So there are many ways in which you can then maneuver around the setting of the
Yes, because I thought we could wait for a natural settling of the ground, but I mean, we live in technology. There's ways to do it.
Absolutely.
Another aspect that was brought up, but they didn't explain why. They say it's advisable to put a tombstone down in winter. What could that be about, Irvine?
Yes. So in our space as well, we understand that there's clients as well that come and tell us that no, we are actually planning to install in winter. They're just avoiding the rains of spring and summer. So they're saying it's in steady environments where it's not raining and things like that. So that's basically the reason why some clients actually prefer to do it in winter. Some have cultural reasons and things like that. But yeah.
Very, very interesting. I'd love to take your calls. I'd love to get your comments. I'd love to hear from you. 0861 987 000. That's the number that you can dial, or you can send us a voice note on 083 303 7093. All right, so we've talked a little bit about immediate tombstone placement versus waiting a few months, but are there drawbacks to either?
Oh, well, when we're looking at drawbacks, I think we'll then once again drawn to factors that would make one decide to whether put this tombstone or not, right? Because it's a decision that the family has to make. Yeah. So and like what I have explained earlier, to say that if there are no cultural reasons or affordability reasons, practicality and things like that, I think it's all left to personal preference. As to why would you want to do it now and not wait a few months, a few years, or things like that. Yeah.
Many installers have a way to support the tomb not to cave in years later.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. So, of course, because if you... As a tombstone supplier and installers, that's one factor that needs to be put in to take it into serious consideration, so that the tombstone does not fall in. It's just like when you're building a house, you need to consider that as well. It's similar because you're putting up something, you're building up something, so you need to put a lot of factors in place for you to curb that particular aspect of things, where the tombstone, we have seen that many times, tombstones that you have caved in and things like
cracked.
that.
Yes.
Because it then causes damages. Yes. And then after it causes damages, it's a cost as well to the family, because they now have to repair that. And it's another stressful period as well that families now have to go through to say that the house of their loved ones have fallen apart. Like what I'm saying, because it's quite sensitive, and some people really see tombstones, and it is a house for their beloved ones. And now when they're seeing scenarios where the tombstone now is cracked and things like that, it causes so much pain to families. So we really need to look into that whenever we do our installations.
We're going to take some calls and some voice notes. We're going to take a short break, and then I want to talk a little bit about, what trends there are in terms of tombstones. Sure. We've seen some incredibly elaborate tombstones over time coming to the fore. But we've also seen a very scary trend of tombstone materials being stolen.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe you can tell us some of the ways that Stanstones is, trying to combat that in our society and with the services that you provide. More on our ideal moment to erect a tombstone as we continue our conversation after this short break.
When it comes to offshore investing, your investments deserve first-class treatment. As the only global investment manager with roots in South Africa, we're here for you and everywhere for your money. 91. Investing for a world of change. 91 is an authorized FSP.
Did you know the National Department of Transport has allocated 7.7 billion rand in bus subsidies for 2024-25, a 4.5% increase from last year. Through the taxi recapitalization program, over 83,700 old taxis have been scrapped, with 5.9 billion rand paid to operators. The National Learner Transport Program supports over 707,000 learners. Since 2001, the Shova Kulula bicycle program has distributed 122,000 bicycles to learners, with 32,000 delivered during the current period. Doing more together, building better infrastructure and delivering efficient service through collaboration. This message is brought to you by the National Department of Transport.
Speak up. Call the power line on 0861 987 000.
We're in studio with Irvine M. Stanford, Stanstones Managing Director, to answer some questions around the ideal moment to erect a tombstone. A lot of it so far is coming down to specific choice from a cultural practice point of view, but also from an affordability point of view. But what Irvine has been very careful to continue mentioning is that this is an incredibly sensitive and important to deal with care situation. And so I'd love to hear some of your stories and your comments on 0861987000. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing now in terms of tombstones. What are people requesting? I know that there was a time where things were quite ornate and elaborate. I think the late 90s maybe gave us an injection of capacity financially, so maybe that happened there. But where are we in terms of the world of the trends around tombstones, Irvine?
Okay, thank you, Pabi, once again for that question. In terms of trends, I would like to say that South Africa actually we are sort of like a leader in terms of trends in Africa.
Okay.
In terms of the kind of stones that we in terms of designs actually. Yes, we do. However, we do import some of the material from other nations. But in terms of designs and things like that, we are up in the game. And trains actually comes down to sometimes affordability.
Of course.
Yes, it comes down to affordability where families, especially we have seen this in mostly our African culture, where because of how sentimental tombstones are at the end of the day. So some of them, they can spend 500,000 on a tombstone, yet in other cultures, it's really something that is not quite significant to them.
Right.
So they can spend 4,000. They would tell you from personal experience. Some people would tell you that we want the cheapest tombstone there is. So to them, the value is not in that. But so it like any other product, it all narrows down to what people value. So yeah, we have seen a lot in terms of our in terms of huge trends where especially when you go to cemeteries that are well much more protected, you then see quite a lot of expensive, if I can say, tombstones.
I mean, I think that's the way it is with anything, right? It's what you value and what your choice is. And so I had wondered if perhaps you saw a spike in the more ornate, more kind of over-the-top tombstones or not.
No, yes, we have. Like what I'm saying to you, that if you go to like Four Ways Memorial, you will see, because they sell estates as well of 8 graves and things like that, and you can literally see that people can invest 5 million, 10 million into that particular estate in terms of tombstones and things like that. So we have really seen that people. So it's exactly what then people values in terms of how they want their loved ones' house to be like at the end of the day.
You know, people on X will say anything. And so, reading the comments, looking at this really dignified tombstone of Ntate Mbowene's, but people were saying, I was expecting to see a dramatic white tombstone with a currency note and his signature on it, or the parliamentary building. And it just goes to show, what you value or what's available to you at the time, because we also see other tombstones with built-in televisions and things of that nature. So it is quite interesting to see across the board. 0861 987 000 or 083 303 7093. We do have a few voice notes that have come through. Let's have a listen together.
Hi, Pabi Moloi here. Yeah, Ntoya putting up a tombstone. I still feel people have to bye-bye erect and they have to know what they are doing. My dad passed on in 1997, October, and the tombstone was erected at the same time. Inside and then for as long as they know how to erect it, up until now, I see the ways.
Wow.
So this thing or what, it doesn't really work. As long as people know how to do it, they can do it. Thank you.
Pabi, Mantla here from Murrayfield.
Hi, Mantla.
So my mom passed away around 2020, December, and through the decision made by with the family, we decided to bury her on top of our great-grandmother. But we've waited since, because when it starts raining, things started to shift, and we had to refix again. But the concept of burying on top of another, I myself, I desire to be buried on top of my grandfather. What's the take?
Such a great question. I think so many people, I was saying to my team that we are the elders now, right? So we've got to make very, very big decisions, and that includes the last burial rites. And so something that does come up on a regular basis, burying on top of your grandmother, your mother, in that kind of space. Mandla says, look, they regret it in one sense because there've been issues with his mom, but in another sense, he still desires to be buried with his grandpa.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
So it all narrows down as well to in terms of what Mandla is saying, that sometimes because bearing on top of another, has several reasons why. So sometimes people, it's because they want to sleep together. Let's say husband and wife, they want to sleep together in the same grave when they rest. And for others as well, it could be a financial issue. So because with municipalities, it's cheaper to do a reopening of the grave than to get a new grave. So that comes to affordability as well. So those are some of the major reasons why people then choose to go with that particular route.
Now talking about tombstone businesses must know what they're doing. With that example of her late dad, the tombstone is still up from the 90s to now. How do you know who's going to be good at what they're doing?
So this is what I always say to our clients is, of course, because especially with our industry, there's a lot of foul play that's done there, and even a good name is no longer really there associated to the industry because of a lot of scammers and things like that. So I think for clients, for families out there, I think they really need to do their on due diligence before they can go ahead with a particular supplier. So they need to really do their due diligence.
What is the due diligence? You must visit other people's graves?
No, not precisely, Pabi, but I think another thing that can help is just to do your reviews, to check reviews of the particular supplier. supplier, like what we always do when we want to buy something. Sometimes we just check reviews, and those reviews would tell a lot, because those are real, genuine people. Especially when you do Google listings reviews, those are genuine people that you can reach out to and say, "Did Stanstones do this work for you? And how did it go?" And all of that, and they can attest to whatever the supplier is doing. So I think because we can at some point do so much, right? And it also goes with reputation as well of a particular supplier. So that can also help in terms of choosing the right supplier.
Rulani, I see you. Stephen, I see you. Please don't hang up. We're going to continue our conversation and wrap it up after this. Your 2 o'clock Power News.
And now you're listening to Power Lunch
With Pabi Moloi.
weekdays 12 to 3 p.m. on Power 98.7. Taking your calls on 0861 987 000.
It is Power Lunch on Power 98.7, and we're wrapping up our property and real estate conversation with the ultimate last real estate that we'll ever occupy, right, in our journey of life. The ideal moment to erect a tombstone. That is our conversation with Stanstones Managing Director Irvine M. Stanford, who joins us on Power Lunch this afternoon. So let's just quickly wrap up with Rulani and a post on X, which is very similar to what Rulani has to say. Hi, Rulani, welcome.
Good day, Pabi, to your listeners and your visitor.
We're talking tombstones. Go ahead.
I'm from Venda. In Venda, we do everything and finish in a day. Maybe because we build from the ground inside the tombstone.
Yeah.
I believe people who are saying we must wait a bit. It's people who do not build in the grave.
Okay, who don't build a structure inside the grave.
Inside the grave, yes.
Okay, so that also then speaks to what Osneo was saying to us on the phone, and others were talking about lintels, literally like how you'd build a house, you build down into the ground, and that then supports it. Thank you, Rulani. Thank you very much. Now who is this? LJ Rasi on X. Irvine says the erection of tombstone on the day of burial is not necessarily Vavenda culture per se. In Limpopo, the phenomenon emerged as a way to cost cut. If one erects a stone after a year, then they'll have to host a full-on unveiling event, which then it becomes very costly. So basically, the main idea is to save money by unveiling the tombstone on the day of the burial. That's according to him.
Yes, absolutely. That is quite true as well. So it's part of the reasons why people then choose in terms of when to erect the tombstone. Yeah. So what he's saying is actually true as well, because that's another reason for other clients to say that let's rather do it once and for all. So we then do the unveiling now, and that's done. You know.
Absolutely. Let's speak to Stephen. Thank you for your patience. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to ask a question that is it possible to insure tombstone because they are still in the left, especially if it's $500,000 and then the property also.
Great question. Great question, Dr. Steve. Yes, absolutely. So is it possible to insure your tombstone? They are stolen left, right, and center. And honestly speaking, when you brought up the Fourways Memorial Park, and then I thought about another new one that I've only recently, over the last maybe 5 years, seen, the Memorial Park in Nasrec, and how things look so safe there. There's water features, you can park your car, there's a chapel, and then Rona Babang, who are in those very old school Soweto, graveyards, we're warned. As you come into the gate to bury or to clean a tombstone, are you alone, sissy? We won. Bata bag. Because it's not safe there. So let's talk about, in general, the idea of safety of the tombstones themselves, but what you're seeing as well in these burial grounds.
Okay, thank you once again, Pabi, for that question. So we have seen, we to be quite frank with you, with us as Stanstones, we have had those instances where tombstones are stolen, right? It's quite rare, though, if I can be honest with you, in terms of what we have experienced. And for us, we have not experienced anything of that sort where a tombstone has been stolen, but reports have been made that some tombstones are being stolen and things like that. The safety can also be an issue, but with us, I think it's how as well we secure the tombstone in terms of how we install it. So we use stronger glues and things like that to be able for thieves, if it happens, for it to be very difficult for you to then remove the stone. And speaking of Nazareth Cowgrow, basically as a group, I think they've come up with a different concept altogether in terms of cemeteries and the likes, in terms of how safe it is there at Four Ways Memorial or at Nazareth. Even families, that's why they can invest 4 million into that particular estate, simply because they know how safe it is. They know that no one will come and vandalize it and all of that. I think even paying such high value, I think the cemetery, they are also obliged to make sure that the property of these people is safe and secure. But we have seen a lot of issues in other cemeteries. Of course, we were chatting now, and we actually wanted to say that we, in our experience between in Gauteng per se, we have seen that in Tshwane, actually the safety is and the maintenance of cemeteries is a bit less than what Joburg does.
Is worse than Johannesburg?
I think I can potentially say that in terms of even the upkeep per se, if I can put it like that, the upkeep of the cemeteries as well. That I think we really need to look into that. I think those that are in government and things like that to look into that, because City of Joburg, I think they are thriving.
Sure. I mean, that's quite amazing as somebody who's like, in Johannesburg to see. And I'm sure those in Tshwane will attest to that as well. And we spoke about many things while we were off the air, but I think that needs a whole other conversation,
Absolutely.
Including, the desecration of the spaces where people who are cremated have those memorial walls and what we were seeing. And you were telling us who's behind that.
In terms of we have had reports that actually people usually the Nyaope people would then destroy those particular
so they could smoke the ash.
So they could
allegedly.
Allegedly. So that's terrible. Yeah.
So it leaves you wondering what is the safest thing to do. And I suppose we'll never get a fully comprehensive answer that across the board everybody is happy with. But in terms of erecting a tombstone, thinking about what happens with the actual ground, I think you've given us a lot of answers. Yeah. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Your listeners can get in touch with us via, they can call us or WhatsApp us on 079 600 8627, or they can visit our shop in Pretoria in Mamelodi at 31 Swale Street, Mamelodi West, or even visit our website at www.stanstones.co.za.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming to answer our questions for us.
Sure.
The ideal moment when to erect a tombstone. That has been our topic of the conversation with Stanstones Managing Director. Thanks once again, Irvine M. Stanford.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.